What if the Carolina Panthers already know who they're taking at 19 and it's not the player everyone thinks? Because while mock drafts keep pushing one name, insiders are hinting at something completely different behind the scenes, and it could change the direction of Carolina Panthers overnight. But the real plan might already be quietly unfolding. What if the Carolina Panthers are about to make a pick that everyone thinks they understand, but almost nobody actually sees coming? Because right now, all the noise around the league is pointing in one direction. Mock drafts, analysts, even fans keep circling the same name like it's already decided. Kenyon Sadik. The safe pick, the weapon for Bryce Young, the move that finally fixes the offense. But here where it gets interesting. When something feels too obvious in the NFL draft, it usually is. Behind the scenes, things aren't lining up as cleanly as they seem. The production doesn't fully match the hype. The fit isn't as perfect as people are selling it. And more importantly, there are growing whispers that the Carolina Panthers might not value this position nearly as much as the media thinks they do. And if that's true, then everything changes. Because suddenly, this isn't about adding a flashy weapon anymore. It's about whether Carolina is about to pass on more impactful players at premium positions just to follow a narrative that's been building for months. And history hasn't been kind to teams that fall into that trap. Even more intriguing, there are other names, quieter names, starting to gain traction inside league circles. Players who don't dominate headlines but might actually be higher on Carolina's real board. And if one of those players is the pick, this entire draft could flip in a single moment. So now the question isn't just who the Panthers will take at 19. It's whether the player everyone expects was ever truly the plan at all. Because the deeper you look into this, the less certain that obvious pick becomes. What if the Carolina Panthers are about to walk straight into a mistake and call it the safe pick? Because every year there's that prospect. The one analysts can't stop praising, the one mock drafts lock in early. This year that name is Kenyon Sadik, a dynamic tight end, a perfect fit for Bryce Young, and on the surface exactly what the Carolina Panthers need. But here's the problem no one's really talking about. Safe tight end picks in the first round rarely stay safe for long. History shows it. Time and time again, highly drafted tight ends come in with massive expectations, only to struggle adjusting to the speed, the physicality, and the complexity of NFL defenses. It's one of the hardest positions to transition into, especially when you're expected to block like a lineman and produce like a wide receiver immediately. And that's where things start to get risky. Because when you take a tight end early, you're not just drafting talent, you're passing on premium positions. Offensive tackles, game-changing receivers, defensive playmakers, players who traditionally make a faster, more noticeable impact. And if your tight end needs time to develop, that pick can quietly stall your entire rebuild. Now add in Sadik's profile. The flashes are there, the upside is real, but the production, not exactly dominant. The drops, still a concern, the blocking needs refinement. Suddenly that can't-miss label starts to feel a little forced. And here, where it gets even more interesting. There are growing whispers that Carolina might not value tight end as highly as the media assumes. That while everyone is focused on giving Bryce Young a flashy new weapon, the front office could be prioritizing protection or even defensive impact instead. If that's true, then this isn't just a simple decision anymore. It's a crossroads. Do you follow the hype and take the safe weapon everyone expects? Or do you pivot and take the player who actually gives you the better long-term advantage? Because if history tells us anything, it's that the safe pick is often the one teams regret the most. And if Carolina is starting to realize that, this draft might not go the way anyone expects. What if the Carolina Panthers are being pulled toward a pick that feels perfect on the surface, but starts to fall apart the deeper you look? Because Peter Woods checks a lot of boxes right away. Local connection, Clemson standout, a versatile defensive lineman who can move across the front. For a Carolina Panthers team looking to rebuild its identity in the trenches, it almost feels like a story that writes itself. But here where things start to shift. When you turn on the tape and dive into the numbers, the dominance you'd expect from a first-round defensive tackle just isn't consistently there. The effort, it's undeniable. The motor runs hot every single snap. But the production, especially as a pass rusher, doesn't jump off the page. Limited sacks, modest pressure numbers, and for a player being considered at pick 19, that raises questions. And those questions only get louder when you consider what the Panthers actually need. Yes, the defensive line lost depth. Yes, adding a versatile piece like Woods makes sense in theory. But at 19, you're not just looking for a solid contributor, you're looking for impact. Someone who changes games, someone offenses have to account for immediately. And right now, Woods feels more like a developmental piece than a day-one difference maker. That doesn't mean he won't become a great player. In fact, some scouts believe his best football is still ahead of him. His physical tools, his flexibility along the line, and his durability all suggest there's real upside. But upside comes with time, and time is something Carolina may not want to gamble with. Because this isn't just about drafting talent. It's about maximizing a critical pick in a rebuild that can't afford to miss. So now the question becomes, are the Panthers considering Peter Woods because he's the right player? Or because he's the comfortable choice? And if it's comfort over impact, that's where this decision could quietly backfire. What if the Carolina Panthers are staring at a player who could protect their future for the next decade or completely derail it before it even begins? Because Caden Proctor isn't just another offensive lineman, he's a gamble, a massive, high-upside, high-risk decision that could define everything for Bryce Young and the future of the Carolina Panthers. At 6'7", 350 pounds, Proctor looks like exactly what you'd want. Rare size, explosive movement for a player that big, the kind of physical presence that can shut down elite pass rushers when everything clicks. On paper, he feels like a franchise cornerstone waiting to happen. But here, where things get complicated. Because for all the traits he has, the consistency just isn't there yet. The footwork can get sloppy. The technique breaks down under pressure, and while he's shown flashes of dominance, there are also moments where he looks like a player still trying to figure it all out. That's not uncommon for young linemen, but it becomes a real concern when you're talking about a top 20 pick expected to protect your quarterback immediately. And that's the dilemma Carolina can't ignore. Do you take the physical freak with elite upside, knowing he might need time to develop? Or do you pass on that potential because the risk is simply too high? It gets even more interesting when you consider the current state of the Panthers' offensive line. There are questions about long-term stability, injuries, aging pieces, uncertainty across multiple spots. And if you believe protecting Bryce Young is priority number one, then Proctor starts to make a lot more sense. But only if he hits. Because if he doesn't, you're not just missing on a pick. You're potentially putting your franchise quarterback in a vulnerable position for years to come. And in today's NFL, that's a risk that can set a team back fast. So now Carolina is stuck in one of the toughest spots in the draft. Bet on raw potential or play it safe somewhere else. Because if they get this one wrong, the consequences won't show up immediately, but when they do, it could be too late to fix it. What if the Carolina Panthers are about to pass on one of the most competitive players in this entire draft just because of his size? Because Avian Terrell doesn't look like your typical first-round corner at first glance. He's not the biggest, he's not the longest, and if you're only scanning the stat sheet, the lack of interceptions might immediately raise red flags. For some teams, that's enough to move on. But that's exactly where things get misleading. Because the moment you actually watch him play, everything changes. Terrell isn't just a corner, he's a problem. The kind of player receivers hate lining up against. Physical at the line, aggressive through the route, and relentless until the whistle. His effort doesn't come and go, it shows up on every single snap. And in today's NFL, where consistency is everything, that matters more than people realize. And then there's the versatility. He's not locked into one role, he can play outside, slide into the slot, blitz off the edge, disrupt tight ends, create chaos in ways that don't always show up in highlight reels. That kind of flexibility gives defensive coordinators options, and that's something Carolina could desperately use. Still, the criticism hasn't gone away. The size concerns, the lack of interceptions, the idea that maybe he doesn't have that elite trait teams look for early in the draft. But here's the thing, sometimes production doesn't tell the full story. Quarterbacks avoided him. He forced mistakes in other ways, and his impact went far beyond just picking the ball off. Plus, there's something else working in his favor. NFL bloodlines. As the brother of A.J. Terrell, he's grown up around the game. He understands the expectations, the preparation, the mindset it takes to succeed at the next level, and that kind of background often shows up when the lights get brightest. So now Carolina has a decision to make. Do they overlook him because he doesn't check every traditional box? Or do they bet on the one thing you can't teach, his mentality? Because players like this don't always win the headlines before the draft. But they have a way of making teams regret passing on them later. And if Carolina underestimates that edge, they might be watching him dominate somewhere else. What if the Carolina Panthers' best possible pick isn't even supposed to be available? Because Dylan Thiemann falling to 19 doesn't feel realistic right now, most projections have him going one spot earlier to the Minnesota Vikings. In fact, that pairing has become one of the most locked-in assumptions of this entire draft cycle. Safety, scheme fit, leadership, it all lines up a little too perfectly. But the NFL draft doesn't always follow the script. And if something unexpected happens at 18, everything changes for the Carolina Panthers. Because Thiemann isn't just another defensive prospect. He's the kind of player who quietly checks every single box teams look for and rarely find all in one place. Coverage ability, elite. Run support, consistent. Football IQ, off the charts. Leadership, proven. There's a reason scouts keep describing him as one of the most complete safeties in this class. And what makes him even more dangerous is how clean his profile is. There aren't many glaring weaknesses to pick apart. No major red flags, no obvious limitations. He's the type of player who doesn't need to be protected by a system, he elevates it. Whether he's playing deep coverage or stepping up into the box, he impacts the game in ways that don't always get the spotlight but always show up on film. So if he somehow slips past 18, Carolina won't just be getting lucky. They'll be getting an opportunity. An opportunity to take a player who might actually be higher on their board than the names everyone's been debating. An opportunity to add a defensive piece who can contribute immediately and anchor the secondary long-term. And most importantly, an opportunity to capitalize on a mistake another team didn't expect to make. Because that's how drafts flip. Not with the obvious picks, but with the ones no one saw coming. So now the real question isn't whether Thiemann fits Carolina. It's whether Carolina will be ready if the moment suddenly presents itself. Because if he's still on the board when they're on the clock, passing on him might be the real mistake. What if the Carolina Panthers aren't just making a draft pick at 19, but choosing the direction of their entire future? Because this isn't a normal decision. On one side, you have the safe path, take the weapon, help Bryce Young, and hope the offense finally takes that next step. On the other, there's the long-term approach, build the trenches, secure protection, or add a defensive cornerstone that impacts every single snap. And right now, the Carolina Panthers are stuck right in the middle of that crossroads. And that's where things get dangerous. Because history shows that teams don't usually regret the risks they take, they regret the players they pass on. Every name linked to Carolina brings a completely different outcome. Kenyon Sadik could transform the offense or take time to adjust. Caden Proctor could become a franchise protector or struggle to develop. Avian Terrell could outperform expectations or get overlooked due to size concerns. And if Dylan Thiemann somehow falls, that decision becomes even harder to ignore. There's no clear answer. No perfect pick. Just consequences. And what makes this moment even more intense is the pressure surrounding Bryce Young. The clock is already ticking on building a stable, competitive roster around him. Every decision now has a ripple effect. Miss here and you're not just delaying progress, you might be resetting it. That's why this pick feels bigger than just one player. It's about identity. Are the Panthers committing to offense, defense, development, immediate impact? The choice they make will quietly reveal how this front office truly views the roster and how close they believe they are to contending. Because in the end, this isn't just about who they draft. It's about who they don't. And when the board starts falling in unexpected ways, that's when one decision could define everything.